Welcome back, everybody, to Michael's analysis show, our second stream for the day. What I'm doing here is a short segment where I'm going to be talking about commentary that I have on different issues that I have been noticing, especially as of late in the last couple days. Well, I think it was yesterday that I posted that we would be doing a review of the book Infiltration by Taylor Marshall, although that had been on the schedule for over a month, I want to say, maybe if not longer. But I did a post notifying everybody that we're going to do that. And some of the traditionalists went wild. As predicted, they went nuts. Not all of them. Not all of them, right? There's some good ones. I consider myself a traditionalist, so there's good people in our camp, but then there's some reactionaries, right? And so I posted that we were going to be doing this review, and it has been chaos. Especially interesting to see the reactions on Facebook. On Twitter. I've seen some on Facebook. I've seen some on the live stream and elsewhere, but Twitter is the most noteworthy. Go and watch, or I should say, read some of the tweets that I've put out recently and just look through the thread, and you'll see some very interesting stuff. As I noted in one of the tweets, I'm uncovering a lot of rot that is underneath this very thin layer of traditionalism among some people in this group. Not everybody, not everyone, right? You can't label everybody in the same category, right? You got to make distinctions. Some traditionalists are balanced and not this way. But then you'll find some traditionalists that they have a thin veneer of traditionalism and piety, but when you look underneath that thin veneer, you find out that there's a lot of rot under there. And it's sad to see, but I think it's very telling. And I think people need to see this. I think people need to be aware that this is going on, especially if, some of these voices are more prominent in social media. People need to be aware of what's going on. Now, not really calling out anyone in particular because there's just too many of them to address, frankly. But I do think it's noteworthy to go and take a look at them. Ariel says, if you're not praying the rosary in Latin, you're not on the team. Just kidding. Not a bad idea, though. Not a bad idea to pray it in Latin. Normally I pray in English, but not a bad idea at all. I honestly think that this is something that we need to get back to. We really do need to get back, at least in the Latin rite, although I do think even some of the Eastern rites, they need to maintain their own traditions, preserve their own traditions and their own liturgical languages, but I think they should also learn Latin. I think everybody in the Western rite should learn Latin, and even those who are in the Eastern rite, not replacing anything in their tradition, but just adding to it, learning Latin. I think that would be helpful because it's a really good tool for us to communicate with one another and be on the same page and not have to use translations. Latin is so much more suitable for that. There's many other reasons why Latin is helpful. I'm pretty sure it was John the 23rd who wrote an encyclical on the advantages of Latin, especially in the Latin rite, and it's definitely worth looking through. And I agree with it. I entirely support it. Still learning Latin myself, not proficient in it yet. I can make my way decently through the Summa or the Vulgate, but that really isn't saying much, especially when it comes to real decent translations. The Summa is extremely easy when it comes to Latin, and the Vulgate, it's a little easier because we generally already know scriptures, so we tend to already know what's being said, right? So it's a little easier to read. So if you read the Psalms or something like that in Latin, it's pretty easy to make your way through it. But reading maybe Vatican II in Latin or Vatican I or Trent or something else like that, that's a lot more difficult. Sorry, I'm still getting over the sickness. So yeah, I think that we do need to return to some Latin. I'm all in favor of that, and I do think it's a shame that's one of those traditions that we have lost when it comes to an overemphasis on the vernacular. Now, I am in favor of the vernacular to an extent. I do think that what we should have is liturgically is probably a balance. You know, um, although I'm entirely in favor of having the liturgy in the Western Rite and the Latin Rite entirely in Latin, I'm not opposed to that at all. I do think that it would be helpful to have some parts, however, in the vernacular, but I don't think that the entire thing should be in the vernacular. It's not evil, it's not sinful to have it entirely in the vernacular. I just don't think it's the best. I don't think it's the best way for us to approach these issues. I think especially those parts that are addressing God in the liturgy should especially be in Latin. I think it's much more fitting. And those parts that, are addressing the congregation, perhaps those part either in Latin or in the vernacular. I would really be fine either way. So I'm not opposed to the vernacular in the liturgy, but I want to see a balance, and I want to see a restoration of more Latin in our tradition. I'm not saying that Latin needs to be imposed on the liturgy of the Eastern rites or something like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about the Latin rite itself. But yeah, sorry to go on a tangent there, but you actually brought up something that was very important. Propers, readings, and vernacular common parts in Latin. Uh, I wouldn't be opposed to that either. Along with this needs to go some other restorations when it comes to liturgy, uh not just Latin, but we also need to have some restorations when it comes to ad orientem. There really is no good reason for us to be doing any kind of liturgy versus populum. There's no good reason for this. It's much more fitting to have ad orientem, especially because this is where Christ is going to return from the east. So we're facing Christ liturgically, anticipating that, praying to him liturgically. Not that God can't hear us if we're praying in some other direction, obviously, but it's just much more fitting. And that is why this has been a tradition going back to the time of the apostles, as Benedict XVI himself has noted in his book on the liturgy. Um, I don't think this is part of the deposit of faith. I don't think it's a divine apostolic tradition, but I do think it's an apostolic human tradition. I do think it's a tradition that goes back to the apostles, but it's not part of the deposit of faith. Just because it's not part of the deposit of faith doesn't mean we should just throw it out and say, "Yeah, well, who cares?" No, we should when it comes to our mentality today, we have done a terrible job at preserving the tradition of our fathers. Now, I understand some of these traditions aren't apostolic. I get that. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But we should maintain some of these traditions, even if they're not apostolic. If they're good, if they're the most fitting, should maintain that. But those traditions that do go back to the apostles, I don't see any way that we could say that should be changed. Unless it's absolutely necessary. I could then see somebody saying our context requires it, but I'm not aware of anything that falls into that kind of category. You definitely can't say versus populum is one of those. No, all that we need is just to explain to people it's not that the priest has his back against you. It's that he's leading you to Christ liturgically. It just need a little bit more catechesis. That's all. So I don't think that we should throw that tradition out. I think that we need to be preserving the tradition of our fathers, even some of those that don't go back to the apostles. I still think are more fitting, such as communion on the hand. I'm sorry, communion on the tongue. On the tongue, not a communion on the hand. I'm not in favor of communion on the hand, as I've noted on this show. Even though communion on the hand is one of those that is very old, this might be one of those areas where I have to say, okay, I actually might part with, contradicting myself here. I might even part with some of those traditions that are human apostolic tradition. in this particular case, because it does appear to be that that is a human apostolic tradition, communion on the hand. It does appear to be that this is the way it was done by the apostles and their immediate successors up until 878, right around there is when you start to really see a shift in the West on this matter. And then a little bit later on, you see a shift in the East. But for about 9 centuries, the common tradition was communion on the hand. And I'm not opposed to it because I recognize that it is an apostolic, human apostolic tradition. So I'm not opposed to it, but I do ask the question, is it the most fitting? Is it the best that we should do? I think that communion on the tongue is more fitting. It is better, at least in our context today. So I might say that this is one of those cases where maybe necessity demands it. Perhaps kind of going back on what I said, this might be one of those scenarios now that I think about it. Then again, I could see somebody coming back and arguing differently, but I do lean towards communion on the tongue for multiple reasons. And I've done some shows on this explaining why. But at the same time, I recognize um, the fact that communion on the hand is not inherently sinful or evil or anything like that. I just question whether or not that's the best approach today when people are so careless with the Eucharist. Is it best to do that? No. Another example is if people are in the habit of spilling the precious blood and being careless with it, it's fitting that you would withhold the chalice from those people. It's fitting. Even though objectively speaking, it's fitting that everybody should receive the chalice. Just all other things being equal, one should receive the chalice. But if there is a failure to respect it and there's a habit of spilling it, going on, I would say that particular community, to offset that and balance it out, does need to have it suspended and not receive under both kinds for a period of time until that's fixed. So, I mean, I try to take a very balanced approach when it comes to some of this stuff, and I tend to see people who just kind of they're on one side and that's it. And I want to say it's a little bit more complicated than that. Now, why did I bring this up? Well, it actually fits into the main point, the main thing that I wanted to analyze. We're talking about some of the reactionaries and among some of the traditionalists and the rot that's there. And so what happened is earlier, somebody, I don't know who it was. Now I know the more popular commentator who retweeted it, but I don't recall who the original person was. But somebody tweeted on Facebook that um, they saw somebody who stole the Eucharist and they had to go and chase them down and force them to give it back to the priest because they were gonna steal it, and they had received it in the hand. Which I commend that person for chasing them down. I've had to do that myself. I've had to chase people around because I noticed that they walked off with the Eucharist and make sure that they consume it. Um, I've had to do that. So I entirely commended that person for doing that. I appreciate that they would protect um, the Eucharist and be respectful in that way. But what they concluded is this is the problem with communion on the hand. And I'm just thinking, that doesn't logically follow. In fact, it is easier to steal the Eucharist with communion on the tongue. Because as this guy notes, he at least saw somebody walking away with it. You can see that if it's still in their hand. You can see them walking away with it. But and somebody's asking, which parish have I seen people walk away with the Eucharist? At my own parish. I've had to chase people around at my own parish. I've had to address, and this was a few years back, not under the current priest, but I've had to contact the bishop about people spilling the chalice and ask the bishop to make good on the directives from the Vatican that state that the chalice should be withheld in such cases. Until people are more respectful, the chalice should be withheld. And I asked the bishop to enforce that, and of course the bishop didn't do so. And I got chided by the priest for saying it, and then he told me that I'm not allowed to receive communion from him for 6 months because I wrote to the bishop about the spilling of the chalice. So that was an interesting experience. But anyways, no, but getting off that tangent, back to things here. Yeah, I appreciate what this guy was doing there when it comes to saving the Eucharist, but at the same time, it doesn't logically follow that communion in the hand is somehow the problem and lends itself to this kind of abuse. In fact, it's easier to see somebody walking away with it than it is with somebody who receives on the tongue, pretends to chew it, and walks away with it, goes in private, takes it out of their mouth, and uses it for whatever purpose after that. It's harder to see that, right? Because their mouth is closed, so it's harder to tell that. You can tell a lot more easier if they keep it in their hand. So that in and of itself doesn't mean, just because somebody walked away with it, doesn't mean this is somehow the problem with communion on the hand. Let me tell you the real problem with communion on the hand. And again, I don't think it's inherently has to be a problem, but here's one of the problems I've noticed today. If you want to criticize communion on the hand, stop using bad arguments. Stop using inconsistent arguments. That was a terrible one. Let me give you a better one. The next time you go to receive communion, if you decide that you want to receive on the hand, once you consume the Eucharist, I want you to look at your hand and notice how many particles are remaining there. Now, if you had not looked at your hand, you would have walked away, wiped your hand on whatever, something, and particles of the Eucharist would have fallen all over the floor, right? Now, we can't stop every particle from, falling on the floor or something like that, right? Some come out of your mouth when you breathe. I mean, we can't stop it to a perfect extent, but what we can do is prevent a carelessness here. And what we can do is be responsible for the things that we can prevent, for the particles that we are able to preserve. And I think that's more the problem with communion on the hand, is that what we're doing is, when a lot of people, when we receive on the hand, we're not being mindful of that. Now, historically, I don't think that was necessarily the case. I think they were more mindful and more reverential towards these things. That's why, again, I don't say that communion on the hand is inherently wrong, but I just say, in today's context and society, at least in the Latin Rite, I just kind of wonder if it's the best approach. I don't think it might be, unless we're really mindful of the fact that we have particles and we are careful to consume those. But that's not happening. People aren't doing that. They're eating it like it's a cracker or something like that. They don't recognize this is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ, and so they're not properly discerning the Eucharist. So the problem is even worse than just dropping a few particles. It's even more insidious than that. It's not even recognizing what they're receiving. Now, so again, if you want to criticize communion on the hand, that's fine. I've criticized it before, but just use arguments that make sense, that are coherent, that are valid, and don't come back to bite you, because some of the arguments that I see will come back to bite you. Saying that the church has always done communion on the tongue, nonsense. Terrible argument. Saying that communion on the hand is inherently evil and sinful, nonsense. You just condemn the apostles. You just condemn the first 9 centuries mostly of the church. Every now and then you have a few instances here and there of communion on the tongue, but the vast majority of the first 9 centuries was communion on the hand, with few exceptions here and there. And I've done a show demonstrating that. Also, you can read liturgical scholars like Jungmann who will note that, and not just say it. They won't just tell you and tell you to somehow accept their authority. They'll actually demonstrate it to you. They will go to different fathers and show you where they are receiving communion on the hand. Anyways, I digress once more. And I got to go here in just a little bit. Let me see what time it is. Well, I got a little bit more time. We're good. By the way, if y'all want to send me some questions, y'all can at Reason and Theology. I want us to be a little bit more consistent with our arguments. And I brought that out in a tweet and simply showed that, wait, if you think that communion on the hand is the problem because people walk away with it, then you should be condemning communion on the tongue, because it's easier to steal the Eucharist on the tongue than it is in the hand. I pointed that out. And then some of these traditionalists went wild just went nuts. And all the personal insults and attacks and calumny and everything else that you can imagine started to come. Profanity starts coming out, everything. You start to uncover a lot of the rot that is there with these people. And it reminds me of the New Testament and the Pharisees, who sees himself as righteous. I fast, I do all this, I'm not like that other guy. But in fact, he doesn't go home righteous. He likes humility. And that's the problem with some of these people. Not all of them, some of them. They might be right about abuses in the mass. They might be right about this or that liturgical practice, yet they lack charity. And that's the problem. Now, I've failed at charity myself. I totally understand. Totally get that. Um, what I try to do, however, is repent of it and not make excuses. And if I fail in a matter of charity, I'll generally go to that person and apologize and try to do better in the future. I want to make excuses for my sin. I won't say that, oh, no, this is perfectly fine behavior. Whereas I'm seeing these people justifying their profanity, their vulgarity, their pride, their hypocrisy. I'm seeing them justify uncharitable behavior. And that's where there's really an issue. Because I get that we're all going to sin, and I get that there's times where we struggle with charity. What I don't accept is for us to make excuses for sin. I don't accept that. That's where I want to say, no, we can't do that. We sin against one another, we need to confess our sins and repent and move forward. But we don't need to make excuses for them. And that's what I'm saying. And I'm seeing a lot of rot being uncovered underneath it all. And so I'm going to continue to address these issues. I'm going to continue even more now because I wanted people to see what's being uncovered here, and where some of this leads to spiritually and emotionally. And I already know it because I've been there. I've been where a lot of these people are. So I already know what they're struggling with. But I want other people to see this is where it leads. So I want others to benefit from it. Take it as a warning sign. Again, y'all can go check it out. See it on social media. It's all over the place. Ever since I said that and it actually didn't begin when I said that we were going to be doing this review of Infiltration. It's been ongoing, but especially I've noticed some stuff since then. Well, mainly really when I started challenging some of the things that Taylor Marshall said is when I really started noticing this stuff. But my intention, of course, is to charitably challenge arguments, right? I'm not trying to mock an individual or condemn a particular individual in their eternal fate or something like that. I can't judge that. It's hard enough to discern my own motives and my own heart, let alone somebody else's. So it's very hard for me to do that. But what I can do is I can judge words, positions, arguments, and where they lead. I can do that. And that's what I'm trying to do. And if I failed at that, I sincerely ask people to forgive me. But that is the intention. And I'm going to continue to do so. And that's what we're going to do tonight. Charitably, we're going to interact with Dr. Marshall's book, Infiltration. So everybody tune into that. That's going to be at 6 p.m. Central. So about, 5 hours, 20 minutes or so? Yeah. 6 p.m. Central. Having River Run on and Kevin Simons, who has done some reviews on the work of Dr. Marshall before. And and they've also read through the book, and they have quite a few things to say by way of review. So that's what we're going to do. Let's see if there's any questions there in the chat. Let me get to it. Make sure to send it to @Reason and Theology. Let's see. I see somebody asking, will I do videos on the Jews? Yeah, there will be plenty of stuff interacting with Judaism, although this person is a troll, so I'm blocking them. But yeah, we will be engaging some of the Jewish position. One of the reasons why I don't engage it a whole lot is because there's just not a whole lot of people out there who are going to Judaism. So it's not as much of a pressing need. At the same time, it's the Jews that are entitled to this gospel more than anyone else. The Jews are entitled to the gospel first, then the Gentiles, as scripture says, because they were serving the one God while we were still pagans, worshiping false gods and pagan deities and sacrificing humans. So to them belongs the preaching of the gospel first and foremost. So I am very concerned about preaching the gospel to Jews at the same time. It hasn't been um, as much of a priority probably as it should be on this channel. So, although incidentally, the very first person I interviewed was a rabbi in the show, and we had a little discussion debate. But we'll have more. I definitely intend to have more. But I'm not going to engage of any kind of anti-Semitism and all that stuff that I just saw there from this person in the chat. Even though there might be some merit to the particular thing that they were saying about what the Talmud says, I think it was probably coming from not a sincere place due to the name of the uh, name of the person there in the chat. Hard to believe that they had goodwill. Okay. Looking through, y'all, trying to see if I can find something. Again, make sure to send it to @Reason Theology. That way I can pick it out. Why won't Phaser come on to RNT? I don't know. He's been busy. I've asked him over 5 times and he's declined 5 times. So I'm not gonna ask again. I know he's busy. If he wants to come on, he can reach out to me. Is it possible to have Father Richard Price on the show? You know what? I've actually reached out to him. He's declined just because he feels that he wouldn't do very well in video. So, oh well, I think he would. And I tried to push the issue. Yeah, you would do great. Nah, he wasn't going for it. Let's see. Does your fear of where rad tradism led you justify it as a generalization of where you think it will lead many or most others? I'm not sure I really understand the question, but I think I might. I think you're asking is, are my concerns about some of these traditionalists over where they might, the trajectory and where it ends up leading people? If that is the question, that is a yes, because I engage Eastern Orthodoxy a lot, and I note that some of these arguments are the same stuff that the Eastern Orthodox say, or at least lends itself to Eastern Orthodox ecclesiology. So when you're making a case against the papacy or an ecumenical council that is in favor of somebody else's ecclesiology, I have to really ask the question whether or not you're being consistent and whether or not you realize you're being used as a pawn uh, for somebody else's communion. So I'm going to call that out just as much as I call Eastern Orthodox out for their understanding of ecclesiology. I'm going to do the same whenever I see some Catholics doing it. Whenever they say something that is going to undermine the indefectibility of the church or the papacy as a divine institution, I'm going to address it just like I would Eastern Orthodox. Otherwise, on what basis can I really engage the Orthodox and criticize them when they're using some of the arguments that they're getting from us? I mean, I can't consistently do that. Plus, if I'm going to call out other people who are liberals or modernists for their novelty in theology, I have to do that when it comes to some of these Catholics, when they come up with some novel stuff that has not been the tradition of the Catholic Church and is just as novel as some of these other things that I'm saying among the liberals. So, on what basis do I call them out? On what basis do I say Father James Martin is wrong, but not an equally novel position coming from some kind of reactionary Catholic? I'm going to address both. I'm looking, y'all. Let's see if I can find any more. A lot going on in the chat. So somebody says, I went to my first Melkite Divine Liturgy this past weekend, and the age vibe of the parish matched my traditional Latin mass. Do you feel Eastern Catholicism may be a rising avenue for tradition? Yeah, absolutely. Support the Eastern Catholics because they're getting it from both sides. Really, I feel so bad for the Eastern Catholics. They're getting it from the Orthodox and they're getting it from some of the reactionary traditionalists unknowingly who end up criticizing the Eastern Catholic position without even knowing it. Uh, I feel bad for them. I kind of feel like I'm one of them, even though technically I don't belong to any Eastern Rite church. I completely understand what they're going through. So please support our Eastern Catholic brothers. They need it. But yes, I do think that it is a great form of tradition that we could explore as Catholics. I think that many of us should, not just the Latin Rite. I think there are some things that the Eastern Rite has preserved better than the Latin tradition. Then again, I also think that there's some things in the Latin tradition that it has preserved better than the Eastern traditions. So I'm not a one or the other. I recognize that there's some good in each, and also recognize that some others have preserved some things a little bit better. Okay. Let's see. Please don't bring your rad tradism to Eastern Catholicism. Well, I agree with that. Don't do that. I agree 100% with that commenter. Yeah, don't bring rad tradism to Eastern Catholicism. You just make the issue worse than it already is. They're already having a struggle with different things right now. So now don't bring additional problems to them. Bring good to the Eastern Catholics. The solution would be to get rid of some of this reactionary approach altogether. Can I do a show on Eastern Orthodoxy and Holy Fire? Yes, I definitely intend to. What does the Roman Rite preserve better? Oh, goodness. Where do I even start? I know I've done shows talking about this. We, in fact, did a show, two shows actually, where and this was Eric Ibarra and I, where we go over this in detail. And one is focusing on what the Latin tradition has done better than the Eastern traditions, and likewise what the Eastern traditions have done better than the Latin Rite. So definitely check that out. Okay. Have I ever watched the YouTube channel Rights and Duties? Is that guy who is the Trad Patrick guy who was criticizing me the other day? I think that's him. And everybody told me to go and watch it. I watched a few minutes. I had to turn it off because he kept using the F word nonstop. This is a person who identifies as a Catholic, constantly cussing and using the F word publicly. Look, I get some of us may not always use the best words, especially when it comes to in private. I totally get that. Although it's not excusable. I understand that some people slip up here and there, but publicly that's not that's a even worse issue. It's not okay in private, but it's definitely worse in public because it's going to scandalize people. So that kind of vulgarity and profanity and language tells you a lot about that particular person. Then I heard that person saying all kinds of things about me that weren't even true, and it's clear that they've never seen any of my material. Because as some people I think were noted in the comment to that video, the comment section, this guy, you haven't even watched any of Michael's videos because he actually says the opposite of what you're saying about him. So no, I think that's actually a perfect example. Be aware of people like that. Be aware that you're going to find voices like that in some of these traditionalist circles, and they're going to come across as if they're traditionalist, but then you peel back the thin veneer and you find some pretty disgusting stuff. That kind of behavior is shameful and pitiful, and he should be rebuked for that. And so I think that people need to be aware of that. And then go and watch, by the way, the people who go and support that individual. Go and look into those Catholic voices too online. The ones that are supporting this guy, go and look into their content. You'll start to see some very, very disturbing things with them as well. That's the kind of group that I'm criticizing right now. Not the faithful traditional Catholics. I'm criticizing those people. who want to engage in debates about the third secret of Fatima, but then they go and lie and slander a brother in Christ. Um, there's a problem there when you publicly lie and slander about a brother in Christ, but then you want to get caught up in the intricacies of the Fatima issue and the Fatima prophecy. I think your priorities are out of whack. I think it might be time to focus on personal sanctification and put aside the debates for a moment. Not that these debates aren't important, they are. But are they more important than your personal soul? No. I think that we need to focus on first things first, our own sanctification. Then we can engage some of these other things. We need to do it right. Tell a tree by its fruits, Humilia says. Yeah, absolutely. You can definitely see it by their behavior. I want y'all to notice when I make these criticisms about these arguments that are being made, I want you to notice the behavior from some of these people. Some of them were fairly prominent voices in the traditionalist Catholic community. Be aware of them. Let's see. You should do a show on divorce and contraception from both RC and EO perspectives. Yes, yes. So much can be said there. Absolutely. 100%. Definitely willing to do that. A lot can be said there. Of course, I'm opposed to divorce and remarriage, and even economia being applied to it. And I'm opposed to the use of artificial contraception. That's my position on the matter. It seems the ordinary and universal magisterium back me up on that. So that's where I land on the matter. But it's not as trying to establish that position is not as easy as you might think. And responding to some of the arguments that are coming from the liberals is a little harder than you might think when you actually look into some of the arguments that they use. So, and then, of course, we need to make a distinction between the liberals who are using arguments against those positions and Eastern Christians and their arguments, because the Eastern Christians and their arguments, it's not coming from a place of modernism or liberalism. They're not using the same arguments. They're using economia, which is a completely different topic than somehow maybe the church can't make decisions on matters of sexuality, or there aren't such things as secondary objects of infallibility. Those are the areas that you have to engage with the liberals. That's not what you have to engage with the Eastern tradition when it comes to their position on divorce and remarriage or even contraception. You have to now engage economia, and you can't confuse the two. Oh, so yeah, I think a whole lot could be said there, to do a show on those. Let's see if I see any other questions here. I gotta go here in just a few minutes. What else we got in the chat? Let's see. Technically, orthodoxy does not allow for contraception. Unfortunately, the liberal side of EO prevails in the United States. I don't know if I would actually agree with that. I would say that there's different views in Eastern Orthodoxy. So there's no one view in Eastern Orthodoxy. You can't say Eastern Orthodoxy doesn't allow for it. I don't think that there is one Eastern Orthodox position on the matter to be able to say that. You can say that about Catholics. You can note that some are in dissent from the Catholic position, but I can't actually tell you what the official Eastern Orthodox position is on some of these things because there isn't one. For better or worse, there isn't one. Now, you could talk about what is more prevalent. You could talk about what's more historical. You could talk in those terms, but I'm not sure you could talk in the terms that you're using. But also the use of economia in application to contraception or divorce and remarriage. I think that still needs to be engaged, but it's a little harder to do than you might think, and you just can't write these arguments off and dismiss them as liberal. And I see that from some of these traditional Catholics who don't know anything about orthodoxy. And I think one of the helpful things that will offset some of these traditional Catholics is an exposure to Eastern Christianity and the Eastern tradition. It will help balance out so many of these issues overnight. Not gonna say it's gonna fix everything, but it will help fix some things. Um, did I find the Eastern Orthodox view on divorce or remarriage and contraception problematic when you were EO? Yes. Yes, I did. especially given um, the historical position on divorce and remarriage. It was very hard for me to be able to reconcile that. Even in the Eastern tradition, you'll start to see the Eastern tradition appeals to this or that father, but then you go and look at that father and they're saying, well, the divorce and remarriage that they're permitting is only for males only and not for females. What? that, that's odd. An odd argument there. Okay. So you start to, and then you start to look into some of these quotes and they're spurious. And so the position in the Eastern tradition isn't as strong as you might think. Although it is there in the Eastern tradition. It's not as strong as you might think. But the position in the West is pretty solid when it comes to divorce and remarriage. It's pretty solid while the spouse is, alive. So um, it's pretty consistent. So that says a whole lot. You can't just outright dismiss the Western tradition as an Eastern Christian anyway. You have to recognize that's a part of Christian tradition as well, at least up until the time of the schism. And up until the time of the schism, the West is pretty consistent on that. So you can't just immediately dismiss it. So yeah, it is a little difficult for the Eastern position, in my opinion. Um, what is your opinion on Lefebvre in open letter saying the term trad is foolish since the Catholic is to hold to the traditions of the church? Well, look, I think that we should be able to just say I'm a Catholic and that should tell you what we believe, right? Unfortunately, that's not the world in which we live, whether I like it or not, and I don't like that. These days, we now have to start putting adjectives on Catholic. Pretty amazing that we have to do that. It's pretty sad because we have a whole lot of lack of discipline. We have almost no excommunications, very little discipline being enforced. So if somebody is maintaining something that's really wacky and identifying as a Catholic, they're still allowed to go to communion. They're not being disciplined. So people start to conflate those people with Catholicism. And so now we have to start saying, well, I'm a traditional Catholic. And now we have to make qualifications because now you have reactionary traditionalist Catholics and then you have non-reactionary. So now I have to say I'm a non-reactionary traditionalist Catholic in the Latin Rite. I mean, you have to start adding all of these adjectives, and it's absurd. I don't like it, but it is the reality of the situation in which we are in. So you can't just say, oh, you should just call yourself Catholic and not a traditional Catholic. Okay, yeah, good luck with that one. You're going to confuse a whole lot of people. When you just say that you're Catholic, a whole lot of people are going to hear that and just think that you believe all kinds of stuff that you don't believe. Um, so I don't like it, but let's not be naive. Let's recognize the situation for what it is. And adding some of these adjectives is actually necessary at this point, sadly, until there's either a thinning in the church due to persecution or more discipline, one of the two. Do most of these problems come from a lack of understanding history and the gospel? Definitely a lack of understanding history and theology, and especially the magisterium. Perhaps the gospel as well. I could see you arguing that. Um, let's see. Let's see. I'm trying to. Okay, I think somebody's gonna email me or something. I think that's what you're saying. Yeah, that's fine. Email me at reasonandtheology@gmail.com if you have a question. Just let me know. I'll be happy to answer it. Um, let's see, how much time do I have left? Ooh, I gotta go here in just a second. Let's see if I can take one more. Hmm. Yeah, well, I see your question there, Ave Maria. Yeah, definitely email me that one. That deserves a fairly lengthy response. Um, is it that why Vatican II and Pope St. John Paul II encouraged Roman Catholics to become more intimately familiar with their Eastern Catholic and Orthodox brethren? Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons. Even though I have some concerns about some of the things that John Paul II did. Um, I believe he was a saint. I believe he intended well, but I believe he was wrong on some things, like Assisi, for example. But yeah, I think as far as his solution or remedy there, looking to the east is definitely going to be helpful. But I would look to Eastern Catholicism more than Eastern Orthodoxy when I say look to the east. look to the historical Eastern tradition, which is not synonymous with current Eastern Orthodoxy. I don't believe they're the same. All right. I appreciate y'all watching. Y'all tune in. It will be interesting. We're going to have a charitable discussion review of Infiltration by Dr. Taylor Marshall. I hope the chat behaves itself. I know y'all are going to behave yourselves. I hope that the TM fans behave themselves is what I'm referring to here. If not, there will be a whole lot of blocking that will be going on tonight. Unfortunately. But let's try to keep it civil. Let's have an honest and open and charitable discussion about it. And just take it from there, see where it goes. And I'd like to hear y'all's interaction with the show. So y'all tune in, 6 p.m. Central. The link is already up. So y'all go check it out. I will see y'all soon. And by the way, check us out, patreon.com/reason and theology if you want to support us. Of course, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and please share this on your Facebook and your Twitter, your social media, whatever you can. All right. God bless.